There's so much richness and complexity in a person's life that makes them who they are. We need to put a face on this because we all have backgrounds, no matter where we come from and how we grew up and how we want to live. And I think bringing that richness is really important from a social research perspective.
This is Coming of Age, Meeting the Needs of Our Aging Population, a podcast about how we can better support our seniors. I'm your host, Donna Duncan. I am also the CEO of the Ontario Long-Term Care Association, which represents about 70% of long-term care homes in Ontario, Canada. This episode was generously sponsored by our sector champion, Arjo. The former Prime Minister of Canada defined Canada as a community of communities, and we have long been recognized for the diversity of our citizens and as a welcoming destination for newcomers. And our newcomer population is only increasing. In Ontario alone, over the past year, the population has grown by more than 500,000 people, the majority of whom are newcomers. With this ever-changing demographic landscape, how do we provide culturally appropriate care that can be tailored to individual needs? What does that look like in our long-term care homes and other seniors' care services? Also, with an increasing reliance on newcomers within the caregiving workforce, how do we ensure we are creating inclusive and welcoming work environments? These questions are top of mind for leaders and care providers. In today's episode, I'm delighted to invite two leaders of long-term care homes in Ontario, Canada, onto the podcast. Our guests are finding ways to balance the diverse cultural needs of their communities with person-centered individual care for the people they serve. Adil Khalfan is the president and CEO of Kensington Health. Based in downtown Toronto, Kensington offers community-based specialized healthcare services, including long-term care and hospice care. Adil has a vast and deep expertise and experience in health system strategy, both in Canada and internationally. He is a nurse, a public health expert, and an expert in international development. Dr. San Ng is CEO and past board chair of Yee Hong Centre for Geriatric Care, Canada's largest not-for-profit senior care organization delivering culturally appropriate services to Chinese and other Asian seniors. Yee Hong offers long-term care, community support services, hospice palliative care, and owns and operates the Institute for Social Innovation in Aging. The Institute builds capacity through research, advisory services, and training. As leaders, Adil and San play a crucial role in embedding equity, diversity, and inclusion into every layer of their organizations and in every interaction with residents and caregivers. I look forward to listening to their insights, so let's dive in. I am just so excited today to be joined by Adil and San, who are real leaders in culturally appropriate care in long-term care and seniors care. Each of you brings such a depth of leadership experience from your past lives as well. So I'm wondering if each of you could just share from your perspective what it means when we talk about culturally appropriate care.
First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to learn from San and share some of our experiences at Kensington Health. In my perspective, culturally specific care is actually rooted in patient-centered care or resident-centered care. You can't really have one without the other. And part of that is their unique identity and their culture. And through that patient-centered or resident-centered approach, you get to know what has influenced them through their culture and their life experiences. And I say it goes hand in hand. Kensington Health is in downtown Toronto, and it's in one of the most culturally diverse pockets of Ontario, Canada. And so being in such a diverse pocket, not only do we have a diverse resident population, but we have a very diverse staff and health human resources and families. I think we have over 20 different languages spoken for the people we care for and have the privilege to work with. And that goes hand in hand between culturally appropriate, culturally safe care.
Son, your experience is a little different. You are the leader of Yee Hong, which is a large organization that is dedicated to supporting a Chinese community, which is very diverse within, but you are supporting a much more specific population. Does that change your thinking about how you define it?
So Yee Hong actually supports many different Asian populations. You mentioned Chinese. We also have a dedicated floor for Japanese Canadians, for South Asians, and Filipino individuals as well. And Yee Hong is, of course, known as primarily an Asian serving organization because that was our roots, is to remove barriers to access for individuals who do not speak English as their first language, who have certain values and customs and beliefs. And it's really interesting that we've grown to serve, for example, in our hospice, only 60% now are Chinese Canadians. The other 40% comprise many different cultures and backgrounds. And we also support partners such as the Indigenous population. We've worked with the Jamaican population. Other populations come to us as well. And I have to ask myself, why is this the case? And I think it really is our fundamental values and beliefs and assumptions, ultimately understanding where a person is coming from, what's important to them, what gives them a sense of meaning, what does high quality life look like for them, no matter if they're a healthy senior, someone who's receiving supportive housing or assisted living, or in our long-term care homes or end of life. What is that quality of life for them? And how is it defined? And it's not a simple thing. Culture is not homogenous. You'll hear us say that a lot. And even in the Chinese population, there are 23 provinces. And we often think, oh, Cantonese speaking versus Mandarin. Guess what? Mandarin speaking populations are not all the same either, nor are Cantonese. Many, not only different dialects, but different attitudes and beliefs towards seniors' care, towards families, towards independence. And so we really need to look at it from not a homogenous way. And we're really lucky at Yee Hong to have started our organization with other partners to have that diversity from the get-go, because it reminds us that it is out there across all of Canada's population.
We think about long-term care, care for the aged, not only in Canada, but around the world. There's this image of this building, and everything is so standardized. To your point that culture is not homogenous, what are those opportunities to support individuality then?
I think there are a lot of possibilities, even though there are certain standards and regulations that we need to adhere to. Yes, we have very specific design specifications for long-term care homes. We have certain regulations regarding staffing and programs and all of that. And government truly wants to help ensure that our spaces are safe and comfortable for the residents and clients. However, we need to also understand what people need to live their lives the way they want. And that means choice and flexibility in their own homes. And long-term care homes are their own homes. And when we think about that, people want to wake up when they wake up in the morning. People want to eat when they want to eat. People have certain preferences with respect to worship or their religion. Some that come to mind include in Indigenous populations, smudging Is there the ability to do that? It's such a fundamental practice for the Indigenous population. For some Buddhists, it's burning incense. Can we allow that? Can we permit that? How do we make that happen? And I think we do need to consider within current design specifications and whatnot, what that means. We are able to meet the standards, to meet the regulations, but also to provide some flexibility.
I think it's how we approach it. We shouldn't approach our standards as the ceiling. We should really approach them as the floor. And why can't we give the Four Seasons white glove service to the people of our society who are coming into long-term care? And while they're coming into long-term care, we have to realize this is their home first. We just happen to provide safe healthcare to them. And it gets back to being patient or resident centered and understanding their care needs. We had a gentleman who was from the Indigenous community, lived proudly as within that community, and then came to our home. And one of the things he really wanted to do was take part in smudging. And we had to understand, what does smudging really mean? What does it do? What is it for? So how are we going to allow this individual to continue to express their cultural identity, feel safe and cared for in their home? And we found a way to connect with community organizations who could help us understand what the ceremony is and actually carry out the ceremony. We went to the garden in our resident home and did the smudging ceremony. Not only did the resident feel better, our staff became better aware of what this ceremony could do. It's important to do that. We've done other things such as Passport Week. We ran this program called Passport Week, where residents and staff choose which countries on an ongoing basis we should get more education about. And throughout the week, we would highlight different countries and cultures. And highlighting would mean different activities, musical therapy from that particular culture, the type of meals we're serving. And it gives all different individuals in our home an opportunity to participate, whether you are non-communicative, but you can still experience the music. Are you mobile? Can you work in cultural dance in that area? And we rotate that, right? The standards don't tell us to do that, but we're giving awareness to our community, and we're connecting community organizations to the quality of life of our residents. And to San's point, yes, standards help us, but let's keep that as a floor. Let's exceed that. And it doesn't have to be about physical structure. It can be about bringing more meaning to someone's life. And that's what we're really trying to provide in long-term care.
I think you both have really articulated that so well. And there's a lot of discussion about equity, diversity, and inclusion overall. It's a big topic, certainly in Canada. And the challenge is always, how do you make it work? Reflecting on your leadership, what advice do you give to other leaders as to where do you start and what does it take to sustain it?
You cannot advance the EDI work unless you can build trusting relationships. Most recently, I think we put labels to it, but it's in the ethos of what we do. And building that trusting relationship within our teams, the people we work with, our community organizations we partner with, our family and resident councils. It's all about building a trusting relationship. That's step one. And actively showing you're vulnerable. We won't have all the answers, but we're for sure going to try and improve our ability to deliver a culturally safe environment for a meaningful quality of life. I think also equity, diversity, inclusion work goes beyond trust in that we need to show progress towards it. Right now at Kensington, we're taking a 3-level approach to EDI. And one is in clinical practice and having clinical champions really looking at How are medical staff and clinical staff approaching people with different needs from various walks of life, whether it's structurally vulnerable communities? How are we looking at admission criteria so that it's more accessible to many people, and establishing targets? For example, our hospice, we have committed to at a minimum 25% of the population that comes to our hospice should be coming from structurally vulnerable places. It can't just be to those people who know how to navigate the system, who have email and know who to talk to. And so we're establishing things like those thresholds and collecting the data on it. We're looking at staff awareness and education about different cultures, but more importantly, their ability to express that they don't know. I myself, I'm learning about the LGBTQ area of EDI work. And I'm expressing that I'm nervous sometimes because I don't know how to describe it, but I'm learning. And when staff and people see me say that, I think it creates an environment where it's safe to express your learning needs and that we're going to learn throughout.
Yee Hong is a really interesting place, as you alluded to, Donna, in that given our roots, there are a lot of Asians working at Yee Hong who gravitate towards Yee Hong because they know that that is what we stand for, and social justice, removing barriers to stigma and discrimination. So what have we had to do is to have humility. Yes, we serve certain populations, but we also don't know a lot. And having that ability to look at yourself and say, you know what, maybe we're not as diverse, equitable, or inclusive as we thought we were. That takes courage to say, you know what, we have something to learn as well. In fact, we need to unlearn. We provide the care that we do without even knowing what we're doing. It's tacit. It's not explicit. It's because many individuals came from the same cultural background. But not everybody wants that. Not everybody prefers that. And to assume is something that is not helpful, actually, for advancing EDI, not only in the general population, but at Yee Hong. What don't we know? What are our unconscious biases? How do we go about asking those really tough questions about racism and about really different political ideologies, about different ways of being and acting? And are we making assumptions about how people are? So from an individual perspective, it's really having that humility to say, you know what, I may not know this person, what they want and what they prefer, and asking instead of assuming that you're providing culturally appropriate care because that's what they want. From an organizational perspective, we've embarked on developing an EDI toolkit. But first of all, we had to ask ourselves, why do we need a toolkit? We need to unpack for ourselves why it's important for us. And at Yee Hong, we talk a lot about respect for all walks of life, for individuals, families, caregivers, and others. And it's really supporting individuals and communities to have the tools to have their own dialogue, not to tell them what to do, not to tell them how, but to have those conversations with some guidance as to things to look for. It's not one size fits all. There are all sorts of different forms of diversity, whether it be gender, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, age. We need to consider all of that and more. And from a system perspective, we need more organizations to talk about this as a real fundamental barrier to health and well-being. It's not enough for organizations such as ours to speak alone. Speaking up and out for equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as against racism and oppression, is something that takes a lot of courage. If we give people the opportunities and the space and the safety to do so, people do have a voice and they want to be heard.
It's such a great point that both of you make as we find the courage. On previous episodes of this podcast, we've talked a lot about ageism, and you have that overlay of age with other populations within this framework. Adil, you touched on this. How do we measure success? How do we then more systemically learn from the work that you've been doing, for instance, understanding who's reflected within the population of your residents, reflected in the population of your staff, and use those data points to drive change?
Certainly, you do need to have an understanding of who's in your community. This journey is new. Our defining equity, diversity, inclusion, structurally vulnerable populations, we're still trying to find out what's the definition, what's the appropriate data points to use. But the most important part is that this is not a destination. It's an ongoing journey. And we're going to continue to evolve our thinking, our understanding, culturally sensitive, culturally safe care. But it does start. You have to start somewhere and then tweak as we go forward. And each point of the data work that we're doing right now, we're being very upfront and honest that this is not the be-all, end-all way of doing it, but it will help guide our approach towards advancing this journey of more culturally safe care. Yes, we understand our resident census. We're taking that of our staff as well. We're working in close partnership with our referring partners to understand who's coming into our long-term care home, our hospice, our community day programming, using tools such as the face sheet that we've created so that our staff understand who the person is beyond just their medical issues, so that when they do come, we can be able to be aware of some of their preferences as they use our services. And we've been cataloging them. I think we can do much better at Kensington and being able to then source that data on an ongoing basis. And part of our equity, diversity, inclusion strategy is a more robust way of doing data collection holistically for both the community we serve and the people inside, so that we can actually set measurable benchmarks.
Son, what are your thoughts? I know this is something near and dear to your heart.
Qualitative data should not be discounted. There's so much richness and complexity in a person's life that makes them who they are. We need to put a face on this because we all have backgrounds, no matter where we come from and how we grew up and how we want to live. And I think bringing that richness is really important from a social research perspective. If we look in the literature now, it's evolved over time. We have moved from a kind of, we used to talk about as evidence-based or medicalized model to, we're provider-oriented, and now we're person-centered. And then there's been cultural competence and cultural humility, and now it's cultural sensitivity. And there's so many concepts out there, but what does that mean for the person at the end of the day? And I think describing it with their words is the most impactful thing that we can do, in addition to measuring the quantitative data in terms of what happens. At Yee Hong, for whatever reason, people live longer than other organizations. And it's so hard to understand why. But when we talk to them, what do they say? This is my home. I feel like a family member here. I have peace. I have everything I need. And so who wouldn't live longer here? But what that does, though, is for organizations, not only the two of ours, but many others, is that we have massive wait lists that cannot be served within long-term care because we are all wanting to build more long-term care organizations, but we need options and alternatives for people who want to enjoy quality of life in different settings. Many want to have that in their homes. How do we provide culturally appropriate home care? How do we provide culturally appropriate end-of-life care in their homes? How do we equip family members and younger generations to also do that. I think we really need to bring all of that to bear, because I would not want for us to only measure numbers, notwithstanding we need those, but we need both in order to really paint the picture of what it's like and what people need in Ontario and Canada and beyond in such a diverse population.
We really do need both. We do need to think about the words that we use. How do we not lose the soul of the people and the communities? One of the challenges that everyone around the world is coping with right now is a human resource shortage. And we are all looking to other countries to supplement our workforce. I'm wondering what your thoughts are, one, on the ethics in some cases of how we're doing recruitment from other countries, but also as we think about bringing newcomers to Canada and supporting them and settling into new communities, which may be very unfamiliar.
I've certainly seen this both in North America and when I was working abroad. I'll give you an example of when I was working abroad in the Middle East. The home care company that I was establishing was recruiting from India, Philippines, Eastern Europe, UK. We had to do a lot of preparation in helping that transition of our foreign, and in the Middle East, most of those individuals are foreign trained. So bringing them together as a functional team to draw upon their experiences for that care was the challenge. Otherwise, everybody would be delivering care from their particular perspective that they were trained in. But job one was helping them settle and even appreciating where they're coming to is going to be their home. And how can we help them establish themselves there? In Canada, I see the same thing happening, right? We have a very culturally diverse population of staff, and many of the staff are new Canadians. So I think what we're trying to do is connect with community agencies and community organizations to help new Canadians and new residents be able to settle their lives. Because if their lives are settled, they'll be able to deliver better care. I think there's many agencies out there that are set up to support them. But how are we as employers helping connect those? The other thing I've found in North America, it's a bit more of an independent culture. You're here, go figure it out. When I was in the Middle East, when we were bringing in foreign trained workers, it was, here's how we're going to help you stay here. I think that's an important element. But a lot of our staff, PSW, not everybody wants to work in long-term care as well for the people that are serving our residents. And in today's resource-constrained environment, we're having to rely more on new Canadians to do some of those roles. And what are we doing? That's an honest question for us. What are we doing to help those individuals so that they're not having to bounce around to find the best job that pays their bills right away? But we're really creating a long-term engagement of those staff with our community. We haven't done a good job in figuring that one out, but it's an area that we need to look at seriously as leaders and as an operator.
Yeah, at Yee Hong, we have linkages as well across Canada, in the US, in Hong Kong, in China, and different parts of Asia. And it weighs heavily on my mind what is happening and what might happen in terms of having individuals come to Canada. At the same time, though, there are individuals who do want to make a life in Canada. And we think about how we can support them to come to seniors care and long-term care specifically, because we are a sector that is facing extreme shortages, like many sectors, but long-term care is not often thought as the place to be compared to other places. We need to change the profile of how rewarding it is to work in this sector. And how are we doing that at Yee Hong? We have, as part of our Institute for Social Innovation and Aging, a private career college run by a not-for-profit. We attract individuals who have a safe place to learn about being a personal support worker, learning to be a leader, learning other types of skill sets and obtaining certifications. It's not just about language because programs taught in English, but it's how we approach care and how we go about it that really creates that sense of comfort for people. And then what happens is that many people experience Yee Hong and they want to work at Yee Hong, and we have preceptor programs. And then we bridge that with our orientation and onboarding and an ongoing inclusion. And so it's not a one-time thing. It is a journey. It is a process. But I think we need to really look at how we bring people in and not just expect that everyone will know.
This is going to be a continuous process. And I would say the thing that really resonates for me and what each of you is saying is you are building communities within your homes that are within communities. And that diversity makes you far richer too.
We're going through a strategic planning exercise right now at Kensington Health. And a theme that has come out is that we need to have a one team mindset. And that mindset is about building community. And I hope that the EDI work is just the foundational platform into everything we approach, because we want to deliver patient or resident centered care. And if we go back to your original question, what's the difference? I would say one cannot live without the other. And if we're really going to know our residents and our patients, then we need to know them beyond just their medical condition. We need to know who that whole person is. We need to understand what their experience was before requiring this care. How will their family support them through this? Do they even have family to support them through it? One example that we had was we had an individual from the queer community living in long-term care. And he was extremely active with the queer community in Toronto. And during COVID, everything shut down. And he felt very isolated. But we got to know him. We got to know the communities he came from and who he was engaged with. And we set up virtual ways for him to reconnect with the queer community during COVID. And his mood, his life, his meaning to who he was changed. For a long time, LTC was long-term closet. And he didn't have to do that in our home. We celebrated him. We celebrated his community. And now that type of approach has led to one of the best events that we have yearly when we have our Pride Day at Kensington. We raise the flag in this sector to recognize the people that we care for. It's quite beautiful to see every year. It's one of the highlighted events. Staff, families, residents, queer or not, celebrating an individual, a soul, a person, our community. That's what healthcare should be about and is, and we live it every day.
My dream is that EDI is not a flavor of the day or flavor of the year or flavor of a few years, is that we embed, or it is embedded within each and every one of us, that we treat with each other with the respect that everyone deserves. And we behave in ways that honors the individual and their needs and preferences. And so I really hope that with this work, we're able to continue to role model in every interaction, in every collaboration, when we go to speak around the world, is that what does it mean to be equitable, diverse, and inclusive? Not to do EDI only, but to be that way. And I think with that mindset, we will truly have a more harmonious, progressive society that truly cares for the individual for who they are. Through that, we'll be able to bring the best out of the individual, no matter their age, their race, their ethnicity, their gender. I really truly hope that we can continue on working together on really deepening that understanding, as I mentioned, of the meaning behind what it means to be human.
Both beautifully said. Throughout the pandemic, Canada and Ontario in particular, the world's media looked to Ontario and people saw the worst. And yet, there is so much leadership happening in Ontario and across Canada. I can't help but think that through our diversity and the diversity of our population, the diversity of our geography, that we have an opportunity to demonstrate real leadership, change, innovation, excellence, and to really model that kind of leadership so that people will say, I want to go to Toronto. Let's look at Toronto. Let's look at Canada. That is where we're seeing the kind of leadership that the world needs in this space.
We have more and more thought leaders, more than Sun and I, throughout Ontario and Canada that are trying to advance this journey. And our staff and our leaders are holding us accountable to be aware and conscious about the need for this type of work. But I think what we should be doing is incorporating, when we're evaluating new projects, part of the evaluation criteria should be, how are you advancing the EDI work? How are you looking after the structurally vulnerable populations within your community? How are you holding yourself accountable to your staff and your residents to advance this work? And how are you modeling this in terms of being, in San's word, we need to be this, not just say it and do it. It should be embedded.
Bringing that empathy will foster the trust that you have said at the outset is so integral to actually making this work.
So your question is, what needs to be done to continue this journey, Donna? And I think community engagement, we need to bring the voice of community and people to the fore. Like with everything else, we need focus, time, energy, but also real resources, because it is a very long and can be arduous journey, but it is very meaningful. And I'm sure that if we talk to family members, caregivers, and residents and clients, they would say, we have much to say about this. And I would very much like to hear it from their words.
Well said. And at the end of the day, it really is about the people we serve, the communities we serve, and the important work that has to be done to meet the needs of those who are not getting served. So thank you so much to both of you for your leadership, for sharing. It is a real privilege to have had the opportunity to speak with you today. So thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you for listening to Coming of Age, the podcast that is changing the conversation on seniors' care and aging. We hope this episode brings a new perspective and inspires you to continue the conversation with your colleagues, friends, and family. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast so that more listeners will join our community of changemakers in seniors' care. Until next time, I'm your host, Donna Duncan. Keep well. This episode was generously sponsored by our sector champion, Arjo. Arjo believes that empowering movement within healthcare environments is essential to quality care. With products and solutions that are designed to promote a safe and dignified experience through patient handling, medical beds, personal hygiene, disinfection, and the prevention of pressure injuries and venous thromboembolism, Arjo is committed to driving healthier outcomes for people facing mobility challenges. Learn more about Arjo solutions at www.arjo.ca.